There is a moment in every empire's history when its greatest strength becomes its greatest vulnerability. For the United States, that moment is happening right now, in real time, in the Persian Gulf. American warships, the most expensive, most advanced, most heavily defended naval assets ever built by human civilization, are taking hits. Not from another superpower, not from a NATO-level military, from a nation that Washington has spent 4 decades trying to economically strangle into submission. And the question that no Pentagon briefing, no State Department press conference, and no primetime American anchor will answer honestly is simply this: how? How is Iran doing this? And what does it tell us about the real balance of power in the world today? Stay with me, because the answer is not what Washington wants you to believe. For decades, the Western narrative on Iran has been constructed around a single idea: that sanctions work, that economic pressure translates directly into military weakness, that a nation cut off from Western technology, Western finance, and Western supply chains cannot possibly pose a serious military threat to the most powerful armed forces in human history. That narrative is collapsing in the Persian Gulf right now. Here is what the sanctions story always left out. Necessity is the most brutal and effective teacher in the history of warfare. When Iran was cut off from American weapons systems after 1979, it did not collapse, it built its own. When it was denied access to Western aerospace technology, its engineers reverse-engineered, adapted, and innovated. When GPS-guided munitions were put beyond its reach, it developed its own guidance systems, inertial navigation, terrain mapping, satellite uplink alternatives that do not depend on American infrastructure. Iran today fields one of the most sophisticated drone arsenals on the planet. The Shahed series, the Mahajer series, ballistic missiles with CEP, circular error probable, measured in meters, not kilometers, and an anti-ship missile capability that has kept American naval planners awake at night for 15 years. This did not happen by accident. It happened because Iran made a strategic decision 40 years ago. We will never again depend on a foreign power for our national defense. Not America, not Russia, not anyone. The sanctions did not weaken Iran's military. They forced Iran to build a military that Washington cannot simply sanction away. That is the first thing the official narrative does not want you to understand.
Let us talk about geography, because geography is the argument that the Pentagon has been losing for years without admitting it. The Persian Gulf is not the Pacific Ocean. It is not the open water theater where American carrier strike groups were designed to dominate. It is a narrow and closed body of water, roughly 990 kilometers long and at its widest point, 340 kilometers across. In that environment, the strategic advantages of a 100,000-ton aircraft carrier become strategic liabilities. You cannot maneuver, you cannot disperse, you cannot hide. And every asset you bring into that water is operating within range of land-based missile systems that Iran has spent 4 decades positioning, hardening, and multiplying along its coastline. American naval doctrine was built for blue water dominance, for projecting power across thousands of miles of open ocean. The Persian Gulf is not blue water. It is, from a military geography standpoint, essentially a shooting range where Iran controls the high ground. Military analysts have known this for years. The Rand Corporation studied it. The Naval War College studied it. The conclusion was consistent. In a confined Gulf scenario, American surface vessels face an asymmetric threat environment that their defensive systems were not optimized to defeat. Washington chose to bring its carriers into that environment anyway. That decision, not Iranian capability, is the first reason American ships are taking hits.
Now I want to address something that gets systematically erased from Western coverage of this conflict. Iran did not start this war. Let that sit for a moment. Because in the media environment most of this audience consumes daily,
That fact has been buried under so many layers of framing, context, and narrative construction that it barely registers anymore. The United States and Israel launched strikes against Iranian territory, against Iranian military infrastructure, against Iranian civilian-adjacent installations, against a sovereign nation that had not attacked American soil, had not attacked American citizens, and had not committed an act of war against the United States as defined under international law. Iran's response, targeting the military assets being used to conduct those strikes, is not terrorism. It is not aggression. Under every framework of international law that Washington itself championed when it served American interests, it is the legitimate military response of a nation defending itself against an unprovoked attack. The framing that presents Iran as the aggressor and the United States as the defender in this conflict requires you to forget who fired first. It requires you to accept that American military strikes on Iranian soil are somehow a neutral act, and Iranian military responses to those strikes are somehow an outrage. That framing is not analysis, it is propaganda. And the ships burning in the Gulf are the physical consequence of a policy built on that propaganda, the belief that Iran would absorb American strikes without the will, the capability, or the right to respond. Iran had all three. It is exercising all three, and the world
Here is where the
watching.
story gets bigger than Iran, much bigger. American intelligence officials, not Iranian state media, not Russian government announcements, American intelligence officials are confirming that Russia is providing Iran with targeting data, real-time satellite coordinates, priority target rankings, precise positional data on American naval assets in the Gulf. And the word those officials are using to describe the quality of that intelligence is exquisite. Now, before we discuss what this means, let us discuss what it reveals about the argument Washington has been making for 3 years in Ukraine. The United States provided Ukraine with targeting data for strikes on Russian territory. When Russia complained that NATO intelligence directing Ukrainian missiles onto Russian soil made NATO an active participant in the war, Washington's response was dismissive. Providing intelligence is not the same as pulling the trigger. Supporting a partner nation is not direct military involvement. Russia has now applied that exact argument, Washington's own argument, to the Persian Gulf. Moscow is not firing at American ships. Iran is. By the standard America established in Ukraine, Russia is simply providing intelligence support to a partner nation exercising its right to self-defense. The symmetry is not accidental. It is deliberate, precise, and strategically brilliant. Russia has forced Washington into a position where condemning Russian intelligence support for Iran means condemning American intelligence support for Ukraine, and Washington will not do that. So the official position becomes, it does not matter. American sailors are at risk because of Russian targeting data, and the official position of the American government is that it does not matter. What that tells you about who is winning the strategic argument in this conflict is more significant than any single missile strike.
Let us zoom out one final time, because this conflict is not really about Iran. It is not really about American credibility. It is about the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's daily oil supply moves through that strait. Roughly 80% of China's oil imports pass through it. Russian energy revenues depend on a global oil market that the strait helps regulate. The entire economic architecture of the non-Western world runs through that narrow channel of water. If the United States achieves its stated objectives in this conflict, regime change, military defeat, or forced submission of Iran, it does not just win a war, it gains a chokehold over the energy supply of every nation that has been building alternatives to dollar-denominated trade. That is why Russia is involved. That is why Chinese components are in Iranian drones.
That is why this conflict, which Washington packaged as a regional military operation, has drawn in the strategic calculations of every major power on Earth. Iran is not fighting for itself alone. It is fighting at the intersection of every major challenge to American global dominance that has been building for the past 2 decades. And it is fighting on terrain, geographic, technological, and diplomatic that it has been preparing for that
Here's
fight
what
for
we know.
40 years.
American warships are taking hits in the Persian Gulf. The damage is real, documented, and confirmed by American sources. Iran, a nation under sanctions for 40 years, written off repeatedly as a third-rate military power, is contesting American naval dominance in one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. Russia is providing intelligence support that Washington's own officials describe as operationally decisive, and Washington cannot publicly condemn it without condemning its own actions in Ukraine. China's economic and technological fingerprints are on every dimension of Iran's military capability, and Beijing is doing all of this without a single public statement that could be used against it. And the official American response to all of this, to ships burning, to alliances fracturing, to the most expensive military in human history being contested by a sanctioned nation, is that it does not matter. Change the subject. Call it a stupid question. Move on. History is not going to be kind to that answer. The empire built its power on the assumption that no combination of adversaries could contest it simultaneously in multiple theaters, using tools that its own doctrines could not cleanly categorize or counter. That assumption is being tested right now, in the Persian Gulf, in real time. In the world, the part of the world that has lived under the consequences of American military power for 70 years is watching very carefully. We will keep covering this, every dimension, every development, everything the official version leaves out. Subscribe, share this, and we will see you in the next one.